Hello, everyone. I'm Dion Cook from AVIXA, and welcome to 5 Steps to Build the Next Generation Higher Education Classroom, presented by Mark Knox. This webinar is brought to you by our sponsor today, Wirestorm. Before I hand the presentation over to Mark, I just need to go over a couple of housekeeping items. For those viewing the webinar live, it qualifies for one CTS renewal unit, but no CTSD nor CTSI. Please allow up to 7 business days to view those on your transcripts. If you have any issues with this, please email my team directly at webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes, and all attendees have been placed on mute. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window so today's moderator can address them at the end of the webinar. To access the Q&A window, move your cursor to the bottom of your live stream video box, locate the Q&A icon, and type away. Just please be mindful that there is a separate menu for the chat. You will have access to the recorded webinar at webinar@avixa.org/webinars within 5 to 7 business days. Mark, please take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Dion. Let's get going here. Here we are. All right, Dion, can you just confirm that you can see my screen, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you joining me here today for 5 steps to build the next generation higher education classroom. My name is Mark W. Knox. I am joined by one of my marketing professionals, Samantha Buchanan, who is also on the line, is going to be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. This session, I want to preface it by saying it is not about speeds and feeds. It is not about specific pieces of technology. It is more of a philosophy, right? It is more of an ideal to understand the new environment, just like the title says, the next generation of the higher education classroom. We're looking at considerations. So think less of a 5-step process and more of 5 things that you need to consider while designing that classroom. So whether you're an integrator, whether you're a end user, meaning a facilitator at a university, or of course, whether you work at a university as an AV professional, you definitely want to pay attention to these things because times are definitely changing and shifting. So here's our agenda for this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Again, 5 considerations for the future of the classroom. And even the term classroom, right, is really changing, right? I mean, we think of a classroom as a traditional space where you have students in rows and columns, so to speak, and then you have a facilitator or a teacher up front. I like to refer to classrooms as learning environments at this point because we can never really be sure what the configuration or what the purpose of that room is going to be. The classroom is a learning environment. So first consideration we're going to talk about is the human factor, then virtual factor, infrastructure, future technology, and something I like to call technology harmony. Now you notice this quote on the side of the image here, we are the music makers and we are the dreamers of dreams. That is a quote from one of my favorite movies. It was originally done in a poem by another gentleman years before, but it's from Willy Wonka. And I appreciate the philosophy and again, the personality of Willy Wonka because he really had no limits, right? He really had no understanding of, let's say, limits, I guess is a better term, right? His box had no corners, so to speak. Willy Wonka was a pioneer, obviously, in the candy and the chocolate making industry, fictitiously. But if you look at that quote, that describes many of us that are on the call right now, right? We are the music makers. We are the dreamers of dreams. Your stakeholders, regardless of who they may be, come to you and tell you what they want to do or what their expectation is. And a lot of times it's our responsibility, whether as manufacturers, whether as AV professionals in the universities, to figure out how to achieve what they're trying to do. So if we deal with the first one, the human factor, right? There's 2 real statements that I wanted to start off this presentation just discussing. What is the role of AV in a classroom, right? Or again, learning environment. Technology in the eyes of an AV professional is fundamental because that's obviously our job. That's what we do. I'm a manufacturer, right? I design and I provide equipment and resources to individuals in universities and corporations to try to achieve what they're trying to achieve in that specific space. That's what I do. If you're an AV professional at a university, technology is your lifeblood. Without technology, not only do you not have a job, but in a sense, you don't have a purpose on that campus, right? Because technology for us is fundamental. However, there's a flip side to it. Technology in the eyes of many facilitators, meaning the people that are actually hosting the class, teaching the information, is inconsequential, meaning that it is a add-on to what they've spent years and years studying in their respective profession, right? Technology is not a necessary in a lot of situations. We have to understand that when we're going through and we're surveying our stakeholders to try to figure out what is it that they need from us from a technology standpoint, the technology really plays second fiddle to what they're teaching. So it's really two levels. It's the way we see it, which is fundamental, and the way they see it, which is inconsequential. If we take that a step further, what is the ultimate goal for technology in the classroom? Again, you have to boil it down so that we can understand where technology fits in. Again, for us as AV people, technology is the classroom. Without technology, the classroom has no life. It has no energy, right? But the reality is, once that class gets going, once that facilitator gets going, our technology that we place in those rooms is really there to enhance the learning experience. It's not there to create the learning experience. It enhances the learning experience. For example, if the power goes out, they should still be able to teach some form of class, right? All should not be lost. When the power is on and the technology has been deployed and is operating the way it should be, it should serve to enhance the learning experience. When you put those things into perspective, you can start to understand, again, what our goal is and what our purpose is as AV professionals. So let's get into it. Consider the human factor. So the part that we don't get to see a lot of times as AV professionals, as manufacturers on campuses, when I go into classrooms on your campuses and I survey the technology that's there and I have meetings and I do demos, there's one major factor that is typically never present when I'm in that room, and that is the facilitator and the student, right? So I go into classrooms all over the country and I look around and I'm like, okay, auditorium style, tiered seating, document camera, I don't know, voice lift technology. We got all this great stuff, all these screens, all the direct view LED, all these things, but there's no students in the room, just based on the fact of when I come and which room is available, right? There's no students. We have to consider the human factor. Buzzword for 2022 and 2023, especially after the pandemic, was pedagogy. Now, if you're a facilitator, you've probably been using that word for a long time, but us in the AV industry as manufacturers, we really just got hip to it in the past year of the learning and the teaching style, right? And how those things meld together. When we talk about the human factor, depending on how many students are in that class, that's how many different communication styles and different learning styles can possibly be present. The facilitator, however, typically only has one, maybe two teaching styles that can effectively communicate their information to a group of people. The technology that is there to enhance the learning experience should be able to bridge the gap from the different teaching styles to the different learning styles. So again, when we start to look at our rooms, especially the ones that are purpose-built, the ones that might be a lab or the ones that might be designed for a lecture, right? We really want to understand who's going to be using that room, what subjects, what coursework material, are they going to be presenting? And then we want to understand how we can use technology to bridge that gap. Lectures, labs, and low tech. So again, on college campuses, there's many different styles of class. There's even more, since 2020, but lectures, labs, and low tech. Low tech, we've all got those rooms on our campuses where technology does not serve a huge purpose, or technology is not even present. It could be a seminar room, it could be a huddle space, it could be a collaboration space, but we do want to take into consideration the fact that there are rooms on campus that don't need any technology. Sometimes the answer to the human factor or to the pedagogy of a learning space is the fact that it does not need anything. It doesn't need a screen. It doesn't need a switcher. It doesn't need a microphone. Maybe it's just there for human interaction. And we have to be aware of that, right? No technology actually might be the best solution. And then, of course, labs and lectures. Those are two different purpose-built classrooms. So we can't always get into the cookie cutter approach of this is what I'm going to standardize on. This is what I'm going to use in every single room. It doesn't always work like that, right? Lecture rooms should and must be set up different than lab spaces, just based on sight lines, which we'll talk about soon, as well as how teachers are interacting with students. We also had to consider the human factor of a new generation of learning person, right? A new generation of student. Just pull some basic stats here. Generation Z, which is really our main stakeholder, our main customer, our main client, the person who we're trying to bridge the gap for the facilitator to speak to, screen time average 7.2 hours a day, right? So we are competing for eyeballs. And I know that's probably not a popular statement, especially when it comes to higher ed, because we feel like when a student is seated in that learning space, that they should be focused. But the reality is they have a high definition 4K, 8K screen in their pocket, competing for that. They may have a tablet, they may have a laptop that's in front of them. We're competing for those eyeballs. They walk out into the campus, we got digital signage everywhere, definitely competing for those eyeballs. If you're in an urban setting, there might be direct view LED outdoor installations on campus or near campus. You're competing for those eyeballs. How do you keep a student engaged who is used to and sometimes can show up to a class that is already has screen or eye fatigue, right? So again, we have to consider who we're serving now, and we're serving a new generation, Generation Z, who's typically not impressed by the same screen or resolution quality that we are impressed with if you're a millennial or a Gen Xer or even a baby boomer, right? We're not necessarily in the same mind frame. Online engagement, so 10 hours plus per week communicating with others. These individuals that we're serving right now, especially the ones that are traditional college age, they spend a lot of time communicating with other people. They spend a lot of time collaborating. They spend a lot of time using smaller screens to get their message across. So we just want to make sure, again, that if we're focused on engagement and human factor, that we're making sure that we are definitely speaking to the right group of people. Social norms. Again, listen, this is huge because not only do we have to support the university, traditional university mission and vision, but now we have to be cognizant of other things that maybe we didn't consider when we first started in the industry, right? So we have to embrace inclusion, diversity, and equity at higher rates because our stakeholders, as well as our students, that's the path that they're on, right? So flat out, we need to make sure that we're making classrooms, we're making technology usable and equitable for all individuals involved. And then, of course, collaboration. So this new generation of student, this Gen Z student, they thrive on interaction and problem solving. They thrive on the ability to collaborate and to do group works and things like that. So that traditional lecture hall that most of our universities have, that traditional lecture hall that may hold 300 to 600 students, may not be the best area for us to deploy collaboration technology in just because of the way it was purpose built, and it may not be set up for that, right? So again, we have to understand what is the human factor. The individuals that are coming and filling the seats in these rooms, who are they? What is important to them? And how do we engage them with technology? All right, that's human factor. Number two is the virtual factor. Now, this is interesting because the virtual factor before 2020 was not a huge consideration, right? It was there. The universities that were doing it were on the cutting edge. Some were on, they were trying to future proof. They were trying to make hybrid classrooms. They were doing distance learning. They were doing all these things. Not until 2020 did it force everybody into the virtual factor, right? To really come up with solutions that could make sure that everybody was continuing to get their education. The issue that we have now is that we're kind of reverting in a sense, right? So I visited numerous universities. again, all over the country, because that's my job. I'm business development, and I have a focus on education. Viral students tend to be background spectators versus engaged participants, right? So it flipped. So before 2020, it was really the same as it is now. If you're in the room, the material, the screens, the content is all geared toward the individual who's physically present. If you are virtual, you are a spectator, right? So we have to understand that there's going to be a virtual factor from here on forward. It's going to continue to evolve, but we also have to make sure that we're being engaging and we're being inclusive of the individuals that are virtual, right? So the learning and teaching preferences are rarely met in a hybrid environment. Again, if you're in the room, the material, everything is geared toward the physically present student. If you are hybrid, you become a spectator. Student outcomes are consistently lower for virtual students versus in-person students. I mean, this is a statistic that I guarantee most of the individuals, again, that are tied into higher university administration can pull, that those students that are virtual have consistently lower outcomes, right? And in a world that's measured by student outcomes and student success, we have to, again, consider the virtual factor, because as more students are virtual and those ratios continue to tilt in the opposite direction, we can't get into a situation, especially as universities, where a larger chunk of our students are consistently performing lower, because that brings down everything, right? It brings down accreditation requirements. It brings down graduation rates. It brings down the overall reputation of the institution. So again, consider the virtual factor, continue to make it a priority. Certain hybrid concepts make institutions more competitive, while other concepts create competitive, that's supposed to be competitive, disadvantages, right? So again, you're taking students on tours through your universities on a daily basis. And if they don't see the virtual setup that maybe they're looking for, that could be a disadvantage to your admission, right? So again, make it a priority, make it a main thing, just like for the physical students, but also balance the fact that you do have to manage student outcomes and you do want those students to be present. Number 3 is infrastructure factors. Infrastructure factors. So a lot of us, especially again, the individuals that have responsibilities on campuses, you get what you got when it comes to your infrastructure. Your infrastructure is what it is. The classroom is what it is. The building is what it is. It's however old it is. We have to work within the confines of what we're given. In a perfect world, every time we refresh a classroom, we would knock the building down, rebuild it, run new cable, right? Put things where things need to go in a perfect world, but that's not the reality. Reality is we're stuck with whatever infrastructure we have. Sometimes we can run new cables, sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can, hang things from the ceiling, sometimes we can't. It just depends on the infrastructure. There's a couple of things that you really need to consider when it comes to designing, when it comes to creating the learning environment of the future. Again, this is number 3. First and foremost, I think one of the most important things that a lot of people overlook is sightlines, right? Sightlines, student sightlines. When you are in a room, a traditional classroom setup, where the students are in rows, in columns, right? And they are lined up in the room, the facilitator is in the front. It's pretty easy to look at sightlines. Like, it's pretty easy to understand sightlines. However, there's still some thought involved, because now we have to look at viewing angles. We have to look at what is the viewing angle of a particular monitor. So for example, yes, a lot of universities can go and get consumer grade televisions, but as soon as you're off access on a consumer grade television, meaning if you're sitting to the extreme right or the extreme left of that flat panel, things are not going to be as legible as they are if you're sitting within the cone, right? Same thing with projection. Same thing with when we look at projector screens. So most of you understand that projection is a 2-piece system. It is a projector and it is a screen. Well, all screens are not created equal. If you're going into a space that has had a projector set up in the past, and all you want to do is upgrade that projector, and you think, hey, we've already got a screen there. It's the right size. Let's just put a new projector in. Yes, things are going to be brighter, but if you don't have the right screen, your viewing angles are going to be off for people sitting in the extreme left and extreme right. And in a world where administrators are maxing out classrooms, they're maxing out students that are in classrooms. Typically, before a class may only be 60% full. Now the class is 105% full, right? So you got students sitting on the extreme left and extreme right. And if you didn't change the projection screen, the students that are sitting on the extreme left and right aren't going to be able to view the information that needs to take place, right? To communicate the lesson. So you want to really think about sightlines. The rise of hybrid classrooms and high flex classrooms have given us the opportunity to really pay attention to sightlines a little more, because now we understand that we have students scattered all across the room that are all facing different directions, right? That presents a challenge if you've only got one, even if it's giant, even if it was expensive, display device in the front of the classroom. Yes, you spend a lot of money on direct view LED. You got 155-inch in front of the classroom. It looks great, but 20% of your students have their back to it, right? So now we have to think about, all right, how can we load balance different displays around the room so that no matter what direction someone is sitting or facing, they have the information that they need, whether it's image magnification on one monitor and it's the content on the other monitor, or you're doing split screen, or you're doing video wall setups. We have to understand the sightlines. The only way for you as a professional to understand the sightlines in a classroom is to go in and sit in every seat, right? I mean, I know it sounds tedious, but to literally go into that classroom when nobody is in there and sit in every single seat and make sure that there's coverage for every single seat in that room. The other factor when it comes to infrastructure is room acoustics. Now, this is something that we never paid attention to. We never paid attention to unless it was a conference room, was a high-end room. Maybe it was a room that had traditionally been set up for video conferencing, and we had to put some dampening in maybe some of the corners and on the ceiling. However, these days, when we have hybrid and high flex classrooms everywhere, and maybe a lot of those rooms we retrofitted. They were traditional classrooms. We retrofitted it with the technology, the cameras, things like that. Now we have to consider room acoustics. We really do, because now we have a professor, we have a facilitator that is relying on either a lapel mic or a dog collar mic to, again, communicate with those students that are virtual. And if all the person on the other end hears is a bunch of echoing, there's only so much your DSP and your software can do to get rid of that, right? We can really take the load off if we consider room acoustics. It could be something as simple as carpet. It could be something as simple as recommending cushioned seats, or you could go into actual wall acoustical treatments or ceiling acoustical treatments to make sure that you're getting the proper room acoustics and the proper dynamics of the speech, right? So again, consider room acoustics. Image resolution and color reproduction. I love this one because it really does challenge you to really have some conversations, right? So again, image resolution is probably one of the most underrated topics. It's both color reproduction too, underrated topics when it comes to education. Image resolution is not as so important of it's not as important to say let's just get 4K because it's the new hotness, right? Or let's get 8K because it's available. It really comes down to the infrastructure of the space. How close is the furthest student from the screen? How far is the closest student to the screen? And you'll understand what I mean later if you think about that. You really want to understand who's in the room, where are they sitting, and what are they looking at, right? 4K looks great on direct view LED, but it doesn't if you're looking at spreadsheets, right? If you're looking at spreadsheets, you want 4K and they need to be really big, maybe you should look at projection, or maybe it should be a mix of technologies, right? Maybe we should be working with projection up front. We should be working with large flat panel as auxiliary monitors off to the sides, maybe coming down from poles in the ceiling. It just depends. So we want to make sure that we understand seating distance and resolution and the relationship between the two, because your 86-inch 4K monitor looks great if you're sitting 12 feet away from it. But as soon as you take it to the back of the room, the person that's sitting 24 or 30 feet away from it, they can't see small letters anymore. It just doesn't work, right? The other thing to consider is the green initiatives. So this is when we get into meeting those specific standards that the universities may have, right, to make sure that you are in alignment with the goal and the mission for the green initiatives on your specific campuses. That could be, for example, using manufacturers that pay more attention to their packaging, right? Using manufacturers that don't have a bunch of single-use plastic inserts when it comes to cables and things like that. It could be using laser projection so that you don't have to worry about disposal of bulbs. It could be a laser projection, again, based on energy usage, right? So again, consider those things in infrastructure. So just real quick, pass and review. Number one, human factor. Number two, virtual factor. Number three, infrastructure. Now, as we go into number four, where we're going to get a little even less tangible, and we're going to talk about future technology, right? These things are the bane of a lot of your existence when it comes to being an AV person on a college campus. Because what happens is we see some of this technology, maybe we see it on a YouTube video, maybe we see it on TikTok, maybe somebody sees it at CES or even Infocom, and they come back to the university, they come to you as an AV director, AV manager, CIO, and they say, hey, I want to introduce AI into the classroom. Hey, I want to introduce holograms into the classroom. And in your mind, you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even, like, I know what those things are, probably more than you, but what do you want to do with it? Right. So again, consider future technology, especially when your stakeholders come to you and they got these pie in the sky aspirations, right? There's a little bit of expectation management that has to take place. So horizon technologies, as I call them, artificial intelligence, better known as AI. Now, there's so many different flavors of AI that you can't even really call it AI anymore. It's kind of like somebody's like, hey, what kind of car do you drive? And you say, a car. And you're like, nah, I asked you what kind of car you drive. You're like, I drive a car. Really? Like, what kind of AI do you want? Do you want Chat GPT AI? Do you want some Alexa AI? Do you want some PTZ camera AI? There's so many different flavors, right? So we had to get ultra specific on the needs or even the wants of our stakeholders when they come to us with these things, so that we know that if we're designing a classroom and they say, I want AI in the classroom, you're like, okay, you want voice control, you want AI cameras, like what are we talking about? Virtual universe. I mean, you can see the guy in the picture. You put the goggles on, now you're in the metaverse, you're teaching whole classes. There is another dimension that is taking place right now as we speak, with people that are sitting with goggles on like this, that are interacting with each other, right? That is something to consider. That could be one of the answers of helping the virtual student feel more engaged, is creating the virtual environment, creating, the metaverse, for lack of a better term, on your campus to engage virtual students. Hologram technology, right? This exists. The device that I seen, I think it was from one of the display manufacturers at Infocom, was a big white armoire cabinet looking deal. That, I mean, it was hologram technology. It really was, right? Where does that fit though, right? What are we talking about when we see these things? Fiber transmission. A lot of universities already have robust fiber networks, and that's great. Now we're looking at how do we leverage the fiber transmission to make sure that every single building on the campus is connected, and not just connected from a network standpoint, but what type of information are we sharing? What type of information are we sending over that network, right? So again, leverage the fiber network. That is part of considering future technology, and that's also part of designing the classroom or the learning environment. Audio, video over the network. Obviously, that's what Wirestorm does. We are huge in AV over IP, and we can have those conversations after this particular presentation if you want to reach out directly. But that is beyond the future of how we're going to distribute video, right? So HDMI is great. HD-based-T is wonderful. We have both of those technologies as well. Most of the manufacturers that are in our space, as well as the display manufacturers, understand that technology is probably always going to have a place. But distributing video over the network is one of those things when it comes to, which the term I hate, future proofing, which is really not really a thing. It's kind of impossible. But when it comes to kind of faux future proofing, being able to walk into a situation where if you need to add a monitor or if you need to add a source location, it's as simple as dropping a category cable in an encoder or a decoder, and now automatically you're connected. That fact alone is going to take us really where we need to go as far as scalability in our deployments. And then, of course, display technology, right? The future of display technology. I mean, the age-old debate. Now, listen, I'm a little bit biased because before Wirestorm, I spent the last 7 years at a display manufacturer, primarily focused on projection in the classroom. But we're at an impasse right now where, projector technology had a resurgence with laser technology, and projectors is getting brighter and brighter, but it's still a projector, right? You got east-facing windows between 9 a.m. and noon. Depending on what city you're in, you're not going to see the image on the screen, regardless of how bright the projector is, right? So we're at that point now where we really have to ask ourselves a question, projectors, flat panels, or if your budget allows, direct view LED, or maybe a mix of all three, right? We're in that space where you need to use the technology that's available to you, and you need to also reach out to those manufacturers that are creating that technology to make sure that they supply the resources that you need to help you make your decision. Enhanced audio. Now, this one is interesting, right? Because when we think about audio in the classroom, we typically just think about the audio that's coming from the facilitator's PC or a microphone. I would challenge you to go a little bit deeper, especially when we talk about hybrid classrooms. The audio technology that's available from some of the marquee companies out there is really amazing when it comes to not being harsh. I guess what I'm trying to say, not having that PA sound, not having that just overly loud banquet center vibe, right? I mean, we were at ETC a couple weeks ago in Los Angeles at USC, and one of the companies out there did a demonstration on just voice lift technology, right? Just not necessarily a microphone clipped to your chest or hanging around your neck, but just speaking naturally. And their microphone array that will be ceiling mounted was picking up that individual speaking and was just slightly amplifying that person's voice across the room. Right. I mean, it was voice lift. I mean, I guess it's the best way to describe it is voice lift versus a traditional microphone. I mean, it was actually very impressive. There's technologies out there right now, again, especially when we talk about being accessible. We want to make sure that the technology we put in these rooms is accessible, usable, and equitable for everybody involved. Right. So if we need to raise the audio level just slightly so that the people in the back corner of the classroom can hear it or don't have an echo, that's exactly the technology that we need to be looking at. Of course, controllability. There's 100 different ways to control 100 different devices, right? We all know of, again, some of the larger manufacturers that have the ability to control just about every device out there. A lot of you have standardized on specific manufacturers, and that's fine. The reality is, though, if nobody can use it, it doesn't matter, right? So we need to look at technology in the classroom less of this is who I like and this is who I standardized on. And we need to go with this is what works and this is what they can use without me training them, right? Big buttons, big pictures, colorful graphics, all of those things go into a classroom that generates less service costs for you, right? Because people just know how to use it. We've seen a resurgence of push button switching, push button technology, volume dials instead of toggles and flat buttons on touchscreens. I mean, we're really at a place now where controllability is the most important part, because that's what your facilitator integrates with. That's what interfaces with. Sorry, that's what they interface with, is the controllability. The next one is what I call technology harmony. Technology harmony is when everything works together the way it's supposed to. And there's a couple ways to achieve it, right? There's a couple ways to achieve it. So we want to unite learning, teaching, and tech. Remember, we talked about the human factor at the beginning. The human factor is the most important factor. We have to consider the human factor because those are the individuals, in a lot of cases, that are paying to go to the universities, that have an expectation to learn something, right? So we have to consider the learning factor. The teaching factor, we have to keep our facilitators, we have to keep our faculty, our professors, we have to keep them happy in the sense of we are there to support their mission. Now, I get it. You're the AV person. You feel like you're pretty important when it comes to being on campus, and you feel like the gear that you deploy, if it doesn't work, then the whole thing is shut down. Yeah, kind of not really though, right? Again, most people, if put in a corner, can teach a class without technology. Let's just be honest. We're there to support. We're there to enhance, right? So a couple different ways to do that. You got all-in-one solutions. All-in-one solutions are great. All-in-one solutions are great. Stay tuned for a couple of announcements for Wirestorm in the next few months on all-in-one solutions, right? All-in-one solutions provide you the ability to take up less rack space. They provide you the ability to have basically one point of failure, and they get the job done very economically most of the time. Very economically. All-in-one solutions are great. And from a controllability standpoint, they're easier to program and easier to control, right? So you have basically a box, black box in the middle of the podium that is running the entire show, right? That's great. Then you got ultra flexible solutions. Ultra flexible solutions give you what AV over IP gives you, which is the scalability, the expandability, right? The benefit of being able to share video with other rooms or bring in sources from other rooms, right? We're talking about multi-divisible spaces. We may be talking about a flex area. We may be talking about hybrid learning. You just need options, right? So you got all-in-one solutions, ultra flexible solutions. The third one is probably my favorite, is the pivot product. And if you are in higher education, you're an AV professional, and you have been around for the past, let's say, 2.5 years, you know what I'm talking about when I say pivot products. For whatever reason, certain manufacturers have not had the ability to get you what you need when you need it, right? So you had to pivot. You always need to have a list of pivot products. These products are the ones that, if all else fails, you can almost do a hot swap. You can switch something out for something else. Either you call in a programmer or you do it with somebody on staff, and you get that room up and going, or you need to do a refresh, you need to upgrade. You got a quote 2 years ago and you can't get the gear for another 2 years. You need to go to your pivot list, right? And your pivot products are available. So again, when you are creating the room of the future, have your pivot list ready. What can I swap out on this quote? What can I swap out in this room on the fly if I can't get X, Y, and Z before my date, before my delivery date? Open source coding. Again, this keeps us unified, right? It keeps everything unified. Open source coding means that you're not using a bunch of proprietary methods to do whatever it is you need to do to get to point B, right? So again, if you're doing AV over IP, you need to look at your standards. You need to know what those standards are. If you're doing AV over IP, you need to be doing H.264, SDVOE, JPEG 2000. Like, you need to do something that is readily available, that if one manufacturer can't deliver on, you can easily call another and get basically the same part and piece. You need to understand what you're deploying, not just this is AV over IP system. I don't really know how it's compressed to get from point A to point B. I really don't know. And if I need a replacement and they don't have it, I really don't know what I'm going to do because I don't have a pivot list, right? Fair enough. Interoperability among standards is really the same thing. Interoperability among standards. You want to make sure that the things that you deploy, which we'll talk about in a moment, have the ability to talk to other pieces of hardware. So if you do have to switch something out, if you do have to make a substitution, everybody's going to play well together, right? I understand. Let me not get ahead of myself. Mix and match brands and equipment. Same thing. That goes with open source and interoperability. You should have quotes. You should have designs for rooms that have multiple manufacturers on them. And all of those manufacturers should be talking to each other as far as programming and coding, right? All of those manufacturers should be able to play in the sandbox nice together. Mix and match brands and equipment. If you haven't learned anything over the past 2.5 years, it's one person, one company should not be doing the entire space. Too many eggs and not enough baskets. That's just my opinion. Best practice. So again, pass and review. Number 1, human factor. Number 2, virtual factor. Number 3, infrastructure. Number 4, future technology. And number 5, technology harmony. Let's real quick talk about best practices, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So if you've got questions, you can go ahead and throw those in the Q&A, or you can throw them in the chat. And my good friend Samantha will be reading those off very shortly. Best practices: stay relevant, not vulnerable, right? Again, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where if you can't get something, you can't do anything. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you are vulnerable because you chose to go with a proprietary technology that isn't being made anymore, or went end of life from that particular manufacturer, or isn't supported anymore, right? You want to make sure that you're relevant, but not vulnerable. So again, it's a load balance, and it's an expectation between your stakeholder and your AV team. Available versus attainable. This comes down to making sure that even though something is available, can you actually get it? I mean, that's really no other way to say it, right? Available versus attainable. I get that certain things are available, but can you actually attain those certain things? These are questions you have to ask when you're designing a room, right? And you have to be sure. You have to get some guarantees. Deploying brands versus deploying technology. Now, I get, especially if you've been in the industry, you've been in the game for any amount of time, you have your favorites. I understand that. You have your favorite brands. You have your favorite brand of display manufacturer. You have your favorite brand of switchers, your favorite brand of control solution. I get it. And whenever they come out with something new, you're the first in line, or you're all, I mean, I understand that. Like, I get the brand loyalty thing. But the reality is we should be deploying technology and not brands. If we're going to deploy an AV over IP system, it needs to be attainable. It needs to be interoperable. It needs to play well in a sandbox with other manufacturers, right? It doesn't just need to be one simple company that's trying to do the whole solution, right? We need to deploy technology versus brands, because if one lets you down, then the next question is, what do I do next? So I believe that's the conclusion of the presentation, and I'll leave you with this before we do Q&A. Very simply put, the future of the classroom. Future of the classroom needs and has to be open, meaning has to be open and available, right? So the future of the classroom is, what technology am I going to deploy that is going to make sure that this classroom is always in the queue to be utilized, and it's not down, right? It also needs to be open in the sense of interoperability with other manufacturers, with all manufacturers, if you can do it. and interoperable from technology. So open source. It also needs to be flexible, meaning if I need to add a piece of technology to this classroom, it should be as simple as either running a single cable or mounting a flat panel. Like if I need to add something to it, it should be flexible. The room should be configurable. I know you got infrastructure challenges that prevent that from happening, but ultimately you want a flexible space. You want the space to be expandable, meaning if you have to add 10 more seats, if you have to add 2 more tables, your viewing angles aren't going to be completely thrown out the window. And everybody that's in that room, as long as it's under capacity, is going to have an equitable experience, which leads me to the next one. Everybody that's in that room is going to be able to experience the facilitator and their content equally, right? Regardless of their personal situation or regardless of their personal learning style, you should be able to deploy technology that is equitable in a sense of everybody that is not only physically in the room, and it's the part I left out a moment ago, but also virtually a part of that class can attain what's being presented. And of course, usable. It doesn't matter if you got the greatest technology in the world. It doesn't matter if you've got giant LED arrays and you got projectors everywhere and you got, you know, I don't know, document cameras and PTZ cameras, and if nobody knows how to use it. If you need a production team that sits behind glass to run a classroom, that's kind of not ideal. Just saying. Like I get that there's some rooms that do need a production team. I understand that. But the facilitator with little to no training should be able to walk into that room and light it up. So with that, let's do Q&A, Sam.
All right, thank you, Mark. The first question is, what is the appropriate room acoustic requirement for various education venues?
You know, that's an interesting question because it's going to change too, right? It's going to change. Like if you think about a room that has nobody in it versus a room that's completely full, like it's going to be different. The acoustics are going to be different. If you have the ability to go into that room when it's full of students and literally play the role of a student and sit and listen, you'll pretty much find out pretty fast what the acoustics are like for the students that are physically there. If you have the ability to be a virtual participant in that class for any amount of time, again, you'll be able to hear if you've got echoes and things like that. At the very least, if you walk into a room and you see hard surface everywhere and you're doing voice lift or you're doing virtual, there's some aspect of acoustical treatment that's gonna be required. I can't tell you exactly what that is. It may be as simple as wall panels. It may be as simple as again, carpet or padded chairs, but there's gonna be something required.
Okay, thank you. The next question.
And whoever posted the anonymous attendee thing about you would disagree with the student outcome statement. I mean, listen, you can send me the study, that's fine, but it is definitely been proven that virtual students have lower outcomes than in-person students. I think we all understand that from the pandemic, whether it was from K-12 all the way through higher ed. That's been a sticking point. There are students that are coming into college that had kind of their golden years taken away from them in grade school. So, I mean, video is effective. I get it, but it also depends on who's teaching the course. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, the next question, and let me know if this isn't what you were trying to portray, but should we take a breath while using the system if a problem occurs in a timely manner?
I'm kind of confused on what they're asking here.
Let's move on to the next question, and Iray, if you can retype the question, we can answer that for you afterwards. Okay, the next one is, we covered lecture halls and conference rooms. Do you have any specific advice for lab settings?
Yeah, you know, the most important thing, Stacy, for lab settings is sightlines. The furniture in labs tends to be a lot different than the furniture in classrooms. And there tends to be things hanging from the ceiling. There tends to be things on the tables that are tall. And, you know, it's one thing to be able to sit at a table and see a monitor, but there's another thing to be able to sit at a table and you see a monitor, but there's something hanging from the ceiling that's in front of it, right? So the best way to approach a lab setting is I recommend every single AV person that has campus responsibilities is to go to the class while it's in session to understand the person that's sitting in the chair and what they're actually seeing, right? I think most of you would agree with me that it's a lot different to evaluate a classroom when there's nobody in it versus when it's full, right? So if you have the time, I would say make it a priority, especially if you're in charge of designing new rooms, to go and sit in that room while it's happening so that you can understand. For sure, lab settings, sight lines are huge. Also, what kind of lab, right? You want to make sure that you're using and deploying technology that's going to support that particular subject. Labs, unlike most lecture halls and conference rooms, tend to be way more purpose-built, tend to be way more specific when it comes to the subject matter that's being brought forth, right? So you can work with the facilitators, the department heads to tailor the technology in that lab to make sure that it supports the subject that's being brought forth.
Okay, and that looks like the end of the questions. If anyone has any further questions, we'll stay on here for about another minute, just so Mark can answer them.
Couple shout outs here. Ford AV in Houston, Jason from Pennsylvania. Oh, okay. Ian from NYC, Minneapolis. I like it. So I'm telling you, I'm so committed to higher education. I know my camera is going focus crazy. Jeffrey Smith from Bloomington, IU. What's up, man? I'm so committed to higher ed that I am in Chicago right now in the Windy City, in my hotel room because I am here for EduCalls, right? So if you are in Chicago, if you are attending EduCalls and you're not on the show floor because you're in this session, which I sincerely appreciate, hey, look for me, find me, send me an email, and we'll get some coffee and have a chat. I'm seeing a lot of folks in here, man. Danny from Pomona, Michael from Florida, yeah, Michelle from Atlanta. Thanks, guys, for joining. I really do appreciate this. Eric from Madison. Yeah, this is great. Again, my email address is mark.knox, that's Knox, at wirestorm.com, Wirestorm with a Y, just like you see it in the lower corner. Feel free to email me and we can chat. If you heard something today that kind of made you raise your eyebrows and you were like, what is this guy talking about? Let's have some dialogue. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate you. Let's have some dialogue around that. I've been in the education technology area for the past 12 years, 13 years maybe, launched numerous technology, right? I was one of the first ones to launch laser projection for the classroom when I was with a 4-letter company that starts with an S. I was launched high resolution audio. I mean, we launched a lot of stuff, right? So been in the game for a long time, have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of classrooms all across the country, which is probably unique to a lot of you who have not seen hundreds. Let's just be honest, right? So I think there's some good things that we can take.
Really
Yeah.
quick before we end, Mark, people were asking for a copy of the PowerPoint. I think they can probably just email you if they're interested in that, right?
think so. I know Dion is going to be sending some items out. I'm not sure if that's going to be included. But if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, you can email me for sure.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees so much for joining us on today's webinar, 5 Steps to Build the Next Generation Higher Education Classroom. This recording will be available on the AVIXA website at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 to 7 business days. And you will get your 1 renewal unit applied to your transcripts within those 7 business days. If you have any trouble, please contact the AVIXA team at webinars@avixa.org. And we will not be actually posting the slides. So if you want those, please reach out to Mark, but this recording will be on our website. A side note for CTS holders, if you've registered for this webinar with an email address other than the one that's on file for you, you won't get credit for attending. That'll have to be fixed on the back end. So I ask you to please email your account rep and let them know that you used the wrong email address, and we can get that fixed for you on the back end. I want to take time out to thank today's sponsor, Wirestorm, and a huge thank you to Mark and Samantha for helping us to understand how to build a higher education classroom in this next generation. We hope you've enjoyed this.
Dion? Hey, Dion, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Yes, sir.
I did want to shout out AVIXA. Definitely, if you've not seen or if you've not got the email for the new Audiovisual Network Professional certification that AVIXA is going to be offering soon. I literally just got an email yesterday. I'm super excited. Check that out. Just like I said, AV over IP is here and it's also the future. So this is an opportunity to work with AVIXA to get that certification so that when it's time to spec classrooms for that technology that I said needs to be expandable, scalable, you're going to be ahead of the curve. So just wanted to say that, Dion. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thank you, Mark. And thank everyone for attending. That is all. We will see you next time.
Thank you.
Make it a great day, everyone.